Hi guys, Ellie Sax here, and today we're going to find out how much your mouthpiece changes the sound of your sax. Let's go.
Ellie Sax. Go!
Is it worth investing in your sax mouthpiece, and which one should you go for? Today I'm going to play a range of mouthpieces for you guys, from classical to jazz to pop, in a range of prices, and we're going to see how much difference they make to your sax sound and whether it's worth investing in a good mouthpiece. We have got these 5 mouthpieces today. We've got a Jody Jazz Hard Rubber 5M, a Selma Concept classical mouthpiece. We've got an Autolink Supertone 6, a Yamaha Custom, and we have a Dukoff Superpower M5 Vintage mouthpiece. So let's see how much your mouthpiece makes a difference to your sound. We're going to start out with the Jody Jazz. Was the Jody Jazz 5M. So I think it picks out the upper harmonics of the sax really nicely. It's got a really punchy sound, punchy AF. When you get up into the upper octave, it really delivers it, and it means that for pop sax, you really stick out. It might be a bit too punchy for jazz, but it depends on what jazz you're doing. I feel like it would be quite tricky to do a ballad on this mouthpiece because you really need quite a lot of air, and you need to be punching it through to make it sound really nice. So it would be really interesting to play a little bit more on this one, but I would say that it is great for pop because it's so edgy. This mouthpiece comes in at £169 new. If you don't want that extra raucousness of metal, then it's the perfect punchy, edgy ebonite mouthpiece for pop. So let's move on to a more classical one now. This is the Selma Concept. You can pick this up for around £175. Let's see how it sounds. Was the Selma Concept, which is a classical mouthpiece, and I think you can hear that. It's got a really rounded, non-edgy tone. It really brings down those upper harmonics of the saxophone, and that's so that you don't punch out and stick out. It's really easy to control your volume and control your tone, which is really important in classical saxophone. So you do get a far more soft and rounded tone with this mouthpiece. It needs a lot tighter embouchure to make it sound nice, which again really suits classical saxophone and classical saxophone techniques. As a classical player, this is a great mouthpiece. If you were just starting out on the saxophone as well, it's a really easy mouthpiece to control. The Selma classical mouthpieces are always good to go for if you're wanting a nice, classical, rounded saxophone tone. I think those 2 mouthpieces alone, alongside each other, show you how massively a mouthpiece changes your tone. So I'm really excited to hear these other 3. Up next is the Autolink Supertone 6. So let's see how that sounds. Autolink, and I think you can really hear that it's a metal mouthpiece. It's got that extra bit of attack at the front of each note, which you only really get from metal, but it's got a beautiful warmth to it that you don't get from a lot of metal mouthpieces. I think it's actually softer on the upper harmonics than the Jody Jazz, but it's that first hit of the note that you really get sharpness on. It's got really rich mid-tone, which is a really nice feature. It's less aggressive than the Jody Jazz and a lot more aggressive than the Selma. It costs around £200, so it is a bit more expensive than the Jody Jazz. It also comes with its own ligature, which looks really cool, and it holds the reed nicely in place once you've got it set up, but I've got to say it's a pain when you take it on and off the saxophone. The ligature moves more than the mouthpiece, and so your reed just doesn't stay in place. I think it sounds very different from the previous 2 mouthpieces we've heard, and so far I've got to say I think my favourite is the Jody Jazz. Up next, we're going to listen to a Yamaha Custom mouthpiece. Now, these come free if you buy one of Yamaha's premium saxophones. You can pick them up for around £80 as well. This is quite a good price for a mouthpiece, but let's see how it sounds first. So for the cheapest mouthpiece, I think this mouthpiece is pretty great because they're trying to design a mouthpiece to go alongside their saxophone. They're trying to design one that can meet pretty much everybody's demands, whether you play pop, jazz, classical. So it's a pretty flat down the line mouthpiece. It's got some really nice punch to it if you want to play pop and jazz, but it's also got that rounded sound for classical as well. I think it's got a really nice warm bottom end of the saxophone. It also makes it really easy to get those lower notes and higher notes out, and it does balance between the top and the bottom octaves really nicely. I would say in comparison to the Jody Jazz and to the Autolink, it hasn't got anywhere near as much punch as those mouthpieces because they are designed for that style of music, and it's not as warm and even as the Selma, but I think it's an awesome mouthpiece if you're wanting to play a range of genres, and if you just want to pick up a mouthpiece for under £100, then it's a great mouthpiece. So finally, we are going to listen to the Dukov Vintage M5 mouthpiece. So let's have a listen to that. Dukoff Superpower M5 Vintage. Now you can pick up a Dukoff M5 new from their website at around £200, but it won't be quite the same as this vintage setup. You can try and pick them up secondhand, but they are quite hard to come across. If you find one, you can always buy it because you'll always be able to sell it for more if you don't like it. This is raucous AF. I feel like this has got such an aggressive attack to the front of notes. It's got a really aggressive, direct sound, which is perfect for sticking out in pop and dance music. Full disclosure, this is my main mouthpiece that I use for gigs, and so I have found its balance of how I like to play it and how it sits in my mouth. It needs a little bit less air than the Jody Jazz does, so I do feel like it's a little bit easier to control, even though it's a metal mouthpiece. It's got less of an aggressive baffle than the Jody Jazz, so you don't quite have to fight with it as much, but I do think that means you get a little bit less volume on this mouthpiece than you do on the Jody Jazz. This mouthpiece is harder to work with in terms of making the entire saxophone balance out. It is quite tricky to get the lower notes out using this mouthpiece because it's not got quite as good a balanced response as some of these newer mouthpieces, but I'm quite happy to work with that to get the unique sound that this mouthpiece gets. I'm always looking to be more raucous and more aggressive in my sax sound, so this mouthpiece is perfect for me, but I'm always on the lookout for a more aggressive mouthpiece. So if you guys can recommend any mouthpieces, drop it in the comments below. I did use different ligatures with each mouthpiece, and a ligature does make a difference to your sound, but I did have to use different ones just to fit around the different sizes of mouthpiece. The Dukoff and the Autolink are really narrow, so you need smaller and more specific ligatures for them. This is the normal ligature that comes with the Yamaha Custom mouthpiece, and it's the sort of ligature that will come as standard with most classical mouthpieces. This is a rosewood cloth ligature, so it means that it does fit around the majority of mouthpieces, and it holds onto your reeds and keeps them in place really nicely. If you want a cloth ligature for a nice wide mouthpiece, the Rovners are great ones to go for. So let's summarise these 5 mouthpieces. The Jody Jazz, it was aggressive and punchy, but didn't have that initial attack to the notes like you get from a metal mouthpiece, but I thought it had a great punchy sound. The Selma is so rounded and warm and is perfect for classical, but not quite as good for jazz and pop. The Autolink had a warm mid response, and it had a real attack to the start of notes, but it didn't quite have that punch from the treble that the Jody Jazz had. The Yamaha Custom was a good all-round mouthpiece. You could use it for pop, jazz, classical, and it brought out real warmth to the sound, really easy to play, but didn't quite have that special magic. And the Dukoff M5, which is my favourite because it's my mouthpiece. Really aggressive, really punchy, but it did lose out on some of that warmth that the other mouthpieces did have. I think changing your mouthpiece makes a huge difference to your sound, and it's not so much about the amount of money that you pay for them. A lot of these are around the same price. It's more to do with how you want to sound. You find a mouthpiece to suit you. It is hard to come across the vintage mouthpieces, so you have to keep searching the internet for them. It's definitely worth experimenting experimenting with your mouthpieces is a cheaper change than buying a new saxophone, and it makes a huge difference to your sound. If you guys have any questions about mouthpieces, about saxophone setup, then drop me a comment down below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more tips and tricks on saxophone, digital saxophones, and performing live. I'll see you guys soon. This is Ellie Sax signing out.